I wanted to give something of my past to my grandson, so I took him into the woods to a quiet spot. Seated at my feet, he listened as I told him of the powers that were given to each creature. He moved not a muscle as I explained how the woods had always provided us with food, homes, comfort, and religion. He awed, then I related to him how the wolf became our guardian. And when I told him that I would sing the sacred wolf song over him, he was overjoyed. In my song I appealed to the wolf to come and preside over us, while I would perform the wolf ceremony, so that the bondage between my grandson and the wolf would be lifelong. I sang. In my voice was the hope that clings to every heartbeat. I sang. In my words were the powers I inherited from my forefathers. I sang. In my cupped hands lay a spruce seed, the link to creation. I sang. In my eyes sparkled love. I sang. And the song floated on the sun rays from tree to tree. When it ended, it was as if the whole world listened to us to hear the wolf's reply. We waited a long time, but none came. Again I sang. Humbly, as invitingly as I could, until my throat ached and my voice gave out. All of a sudden I realized why no wolves had heard my sacred song. There were none left. My heart filled with tears. I could no longer give my grandson faith in the past, our past. At last I could whisper to him, "It is finished." "Can I go home now?" he asked, checking his watch to see if he would still be in time to catch his favorite program on TV. I watched him disappear and wept in silence. All is finished.
That's beautiful.
Welcome to the For We Are Many podcast. That was, I should not have closed that tab. I need to pull it back up because I want to save the link. But that is Mko's SoundCloud. Just search for Wolf Stories Mato and it'll be the top result. But I will have the video link, or the audio link rather, in the video description. Most of you have already met Mko. He has been on, 2 or 3 times. He's also known as the Invisible Warrior, and he's got a recurring blog. The link to that will also be in the video description. I guess I'll just let you take it away, Mko.
Okay. So, we're going to be talking today about 8 wolves that were poisoned in Illahee. Illahee is a Chinookan word for what's commonly known as the Pacific Northwest. It includes Oregon, Washington, and western Idaho. And the word literally means the land. So this is the true name of the land up here. And these 8 wolves that were poisoned, this is being called one of the largest poaching cases of the last 10 years. And there was testing done to confirm the poison,
Colonial Wildlife Agency responded, and they tested a skunk and 2 magpies that were found near the bodies as well. All of these tested for some kind of poison. I don't think that they're releasing the name of the poison, probably because they don't want other people to copycat. But yeah, that's the official story, how it's gone down there. And, so some of the ways that we think about this is caused by colonialism. All of this is. And there's a little bit of an anti-wild element too.
Yeah.
In industrialized humans wanting to control or to kill what's wild. So we view these agencies as illegitimate. From U.S. Fish and Wildlife to Department of Natural Resources, BLM, EPA, Canadian and so-called Canadian and Mexican agencies all across the continent. Rightful stewards, we believe rightful stewards. And as Floyd Red Crow Westerman teaches us, all of the water here on Turtle Island was drinkable. And within 100 years, all of the water here was tainted, poisoned. And so I know this to be true because of my work protecting wolves in the wild. I've spent time on the front lines in Idaho fighting the wolf struggle there, where thousands of wolves have been killed. And one of the things I learned about the water quality there is every in the entire, quote, so-called state of Idaho tests positive for E. coli. There's cow shit in every source of water from the colonizing European bovine on our land. And to the extent that Boise will have water earnings, and the people in Boise are used to this now. They just shine it on like, oh yeah, drink soda for 3 days to avoid the E. coli in their water supply.
They're still bathing in that. You get pink eye.
They're still in E. coli. Yeah, that's how much they love their beef. This European bovine.
Oh God!
Which is just ridiculous to me anyway. I mean, with the size of the buffalo herds that were already here, to bring European cattle here doesn't even make sense. Especially when you consider that buffalo is beneficial to the environment and cattle is not. I mean, on that point alone. While we're on the topic of rightful stewards, though, I wanted to just point out that you use that hashtag a lot. So if people are on Facebook or Twitter and they want to see what you're talking about when you're talking about rightful stewards, they can find your posts easily by searching that hashtag.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. And part of that thing I wanted to touch on while you brought it up is the anti-wildest thing. And I recall on an episode out of the book Seeker of Visions, Reindeer Seeker Vision, he recalls the episode where, because he was a rodeo clown before he was a medicine man, if you will, where they had made a like a 2,000-pound Brahma bull fight a bison. They made them fight because they're always trying to dominate the native and dominate the wild with their European domesticate. And the bison ends up shredding that Brahma bull. They went to charge each other, and the bison sidestep and just cut it right open. So, yeah, they're always trying to challenge and do it that way. The same way they're using dogs to
hunt bears is what I was thinking.
And the wolf. Yes, bears and wolves, the very topic we're on to here. Exactly.
Wow. I guess I never really like looked at it like that, but I mean that is the same mindset that like trophy hunters have.
Right.
You just have to show that you're the dominant, the top of the food chain.
Right.
It's
false sense of entitlement to kill.
And
right.
that settlers are domesticating themselves. Humanity is domesticating themselves through this colonization. Red power. But yeah, so we think that now is that time because some of our populations we're getting pretty close to being ready to assert our sphere. We're talking about revolution, and I talk about it in a previous article I wrote on my blog called Hell. Like these wildlife issues drove some of us to revolution. And I think the editor should be concerned about that. Like a lot of the people that the so-called U.S. has stepped on along the way, they're coming back, and we're uniting with other oppressors. That unity politic that I'm always stressing.
Yeah.
And so some of the indigenous peoples, our bands are endangered or extinct. Some bands, like a certain Paiute bands, were reduced to like, and have now reproduced back up to 5,000 in number. I'm looking at the numbers for Sinban Potawatomi, which is one of my tribes. We are now the 5th largest tribe in the so-called U.S. with 25,000 members. So the empire should be concerned about 25,000 invisible warriors. Once they can no longer distract us with church and can no longer fool some of us with capitalism and neo-colonialism, their shit's really gonna come unraveled. Use that. There's only 2 things this country.
I think he froze.
I think so.
And that's
too.
true. I have to remind that a lot of, and this is why we use indigenous rule. I have to remind that to a lot of folks. I'll go to like white only gatherings and tell that to their whole gathering, like 30, 100 people or something, and I'll tell them that quote, humble them and bring it back to reality.
You kind of cut out. Could you repeat the quote?
Yes, it's this country only fears two things, and that's Indian uprising and slave revolt.
Yep.
And so to go to something like, I don't know, like a Earthly, where almost everyone's white, and tell them that is very powerful. It's very humbling. And it brings it back to that indigenous rule issue that we're pushing. On this, and as it relates on this rightful steward, is that science can never benefit us under capitalism.
Right. We talked about that a little bit before we started recording. Because under capitalism, what was the quote? Science is for sale.
Yes, that's Invisible Warrior, my quote. Science is for sale. Yes. Right.
Right.
And held hostage for profit margins, and we see that negatively affecting every fucking facet. Not just the environment, but, healthcare, all these other things that we keep bringing up too, because of the way capitalism and colonialism has negatively affected all the people here,
Right.
That hits the nail on the fucking head.
A lot of scientists rebel with us from behind the mask, and they work for some of these agencies. And one of them reminded me that when you see these scientific reports, you have to look and see who's having to report them.
Yeah.
Because literally science is for sale. But, we're just seeing the parallels of this from from Kwame Ture and the All African Revolutionary People's Party and its relation to Red Power and the nature of the pan-indigenous alliance that we're forming at Illahee Spirit Runners. That's what's necessary to finally get control of our own destinies, as pertains to, land back, but not only that, but like culturally significant animals such as the wolf, right? The complete restoration of Turtle Island, or plants, animals, water quality, air quality, habitat,
religion,
languages, our religions, the complete and full restoration of Turtle Island to the highest degree possible. To the highest degree possible. And so these agencies, we believe that every computer, vehicle, tool, all their buildings, everything they have belong to us. And we've reached the understanding that we know that it's a myth that white people are going to restore our power. That's why we're about self-determination, and we will have to assert ourselves on agencies.
Well, and I mean, just from like an objective perspective, okay, so we talk about like, trying to fight climate change with these types of agencies, but what do? Nothing. They raise all this money and they do nothing with it. If indigenous people had the access to those resources, I'm willing to bet that things would change in a very short time frame, because we've gotten
Right.
the landscape is so different today because of colonialism, and so much of that goes back to farming European bovine. That's obviously a recurring topic, and it needs
Yeah.
to be.
The ecology would change immediately. I'm glad you brought, and it's because if we had dictatorship over our own land, indigenous rule, we could our own environmental standards, and you'll see a little taste of that is like old Blackfeet Confederacy has better protection of their bull trout. And if they decide one year the bull trout numbers are too low, they'll say, hey, nobody's fishing bull trout this year. We don't care what you think about it, but on what's left of our land that we have agency over, ain't nobody fishing bull trout until the bull trout numbers come up again. You know, so I could
I
see it.
mean, realistically, that should be a common sense approach. But as we know, common sense is not involved in colonial agencies.
Right. Absolutely not. No, they are gonna be, and because the capitalism too, capitalism gave birth to colonialism, patriarchy, racism. All these things actually stem from capitalism. Yeah, so they're going to be more interested in selling like fishing licenses. They're making a lot of money with that. Out of state licenses are atrocious. So we've got, you know, just rampant exploitation of our culturally significant resources because bull trout are significant to the Blackfeet people. And you know, like the story that we started off with, we're proving that wolf is sacred and culturally significant to so many various indigenous peoples. From the loss of our oral tradition in the beginning, we even had indigenous peoples fighting us on the issue because we had more sold out tribes. Yeah, the neo-colonial element, and that confused people. But we're hip to it now, you know. Not everybody who looks like us is really on our team, and so we know. Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's my voice, so I can name names. But we had some opposition from Fort Hall. What's up, you sellouts over at Fort Hall? Wolf is sacred. And we're going to drive that home whether you like it or not, Red Power. But yeah, we recognize those sellouts amongst us, and we're strong against them. We ain't giving no leeway to these sellouts anymore. People who would betray our culturally significant animals for whatever they're getting as a handout from the oppressor.
When you were on last time, we talked about how wildlife agencies fear indigenous resistance and unity of the tribes. What can be done to drive home that unity? Because I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I guess I can't really like say much on it because I haven't. Obviously, I haven't experienced it. I'm not indigenous, but I would imagine that there is a good amount of disagreement in how to move forward in the tribes, just like there is
Yeah.
with everybody else across Turtle Island.
That's correct. So one of the sayings I say is indigenous people will never reach consensus. And so this is also part of why we've formed this pan-indigenous resistance alliance, is so that, you know, we can have a powerful organization from the resistance element, because these tribal governments that you're seeing are a neo-colonial element, and they don't really necessarily speak for the people, and they certainly don't speak for the resistance.
So they have the same kind of setup and influence as the colonialist government does too.
Yes, yes, their whole existence is reliant on the colonist. In fact, that's what sovereignty means. I think I've said that before on this show, but it's a power, that's a power under, not a power over dynamic. And so we're actually talking about indigenous rule here, full dictatorship over our own land. And we want to use the strongest language possible, because it'll sort out who's really on our side or not. We want to use that spark of agitation to find out who really loves us and who's just pretending.
And I would like, if you could take a moment and elaborate on that specifically, because most people, when they hear the word dictatorship, they think of fucking Hitler. And that's not what you're talking about at all. And I get that because we've had conversations about this, but would you explain that to the people listening so they know what you mean, specifically where and how that applies?
Well, it has to do with origins of people's homelands, the fact that our bones and our blood is mixed with the land here, um, power dynamics.
Well, power dynamics is probably the biggest part, I would tend to think, because I mean, I don't know how else to put it, but indigenous people have been stepped on and oppressed for hundreds of years at this point.
Right. And
So I
France,
mean, it's a matter of, well, as you've already alluded to, it's a matter of self-determination.
correct. Yeah, as Frantz Fanon points out, he says decolonization literally means the first shall be last and the last shall be first. And on this continent, the continent of our origin, that we're older than the volcanoes, we were always here. That's what they're lying about. There's no land bridge. We're our oral traditions literally place us back over 125,000 years when the volcanoes were exploding in certain regions. So you match it up with geology. But yeah, it's like the opposite of what's happening now, where we have the least amount of agency. We're 1.3% of the population. And I'm going to be talking later about the Indian Removal Act, but it's led to these political climates that we're absent from. So it's created a tremendous amount of tension with settlers, settlers of color, just non-natives in general, organizing on our land, not with us, but over us and at our expense. Their very existence, their very existence is at our expense. And then they don't understand our animosity. John Trudell said, "Look at them, surprised at our anger." So yeah, they're like shocked at our animosity when their whole existence is on top of us. So we're fighting white supremacy, African supremacy, different elements on our land that aren't ready to bow down to the complete dictatorship of indigenous peoples on our own land. And specifically with Illahee spirit runners, that's what we're looking for. We will work with anyone who agrees with indigenous rule. And so a lot of people are at that point of understanding and ready to unite, but a lot of them aren't for their own selfish reasons. Marcus Garvey say Africa belongs to the Africans. And so by that same understanding, Turtle Island belongs to Turtle Island indigenous, the indigenous of the Western Hemisphere, period. There's no argument about that except colonization, exploitation.
Right.
As the United Nations says that indigenous lifeways are the remedy for the planet. And so that's what we're saying here too. You know, this power dynamic is what's killing the planet. Colonialism is killing the planet. And the capitalism that gave birth to it.
Agreed. Actually, we've been talking about, well, maybe not been talking about, not like a recurring topic, but we had a discussion the other night about, so like democratic socialist countries in Europe that use socialist means to keep capitalism in check, but their wealth is still built at the expense of the global South. Like, whether it's exploiting peoples in Asia or exploiting peoples in Africa or exploiting peoples in South America, their wealth is still built on the backs, on the oppression of others.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, good that you bring that up, because you've got countries like Belgium who claim that they're like a world leader in chocolate, and then they don't own a chocolate tree in their entire country. Literally everything that they're claiming themselves to be great from is at the exploitation of Africa. So yes, good political summation there. Red power.
And I mean, it also just goes to show that Europeans can't necessarily figure out their own shit. So, why the fuck should we try to, like exert control over the whole goddamn globe? It's absolutely ridiculous.
Right. There's 900 nations here. That's the thing, is when we start to assert ourselves, you have to remember it might even be legal, because you don't know whose court it's according to. We have 900 nations. Red power. We're going to make people recognize that here pretty soon.
Like until I read this blog, actually, I didn't realize that there were that many. I mean, I kind of figured there was probably like a couple of hundred, but over 900 nations is...
Yes. Yeah, there's 180 so in as Mexico. So once you include Mexico, we have about 900 nations, and we need to be respected. We're not asking either. We will assert ourselves.
So this is a little bit off topic, but how much like cultural overlap is there between nations? Like, I mean, in terms of like spiritual belief, language.
Oh, there's a ton of overlap. That's why it makes sense to form a pan-indigenous alliance. after, wrestling these last 200 years of colonialism, we've become intermarried. We're significantly intermarried. So that really makes sense to form a pan-indigenous alliance. Like me, myself, I'm Potawatomi, Dakota, and Blackfeet, 3 major tribes across the north. Or I have friends that are like, they're literally have 5 tribal makeups, 5 tribal bloodlines. So now we're very intermarried, which is going to lend itself to this pan-indigenous alliance, and the empire should be concerned. Red power. We're also going to get unity by calling out and putting pressure on our neo-colonial Howland. And we know that they will not protect us.
Who?
And fund.
I apologize for interrupting,
Deb
but
Howland
who is Deb Howland?
is the head of the Department of the Interior now, and she's a Paiute woman.
Oh, okay. I thought the name sounded familiar. That makes sense.
Yeah. And so we know that she's completely in cahoots with the colonists. One of our affiliates wanted to write her a letter. They kept saying, "What about Deb Howland? What about Deb Howland?" I was like, look, we clearly understand neocolonialism. We've read Kwame Nkrumah. I'm not going to waste my time with this, and you're not going to waste my group's time with this. But on your own, why don't you write that letter? Because I want you to see with your own eyes what response you'll get from these neocolonial sellouts. She said, okay,
Probably
I'll do that.
nothing.
She writes the letter, she gets a response.
Oh, really?
And it says, I'm not going to do anything that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris don't tell me to do. That's basically the short of it. And I was like, look, that's exactly what we told you. And so I'm also tired of this "I told you so" kind of stuff, because all my predictions come true, and I'm literally tired of telling people "I told you so." It's like our so-called allies are acting like our indigenous point of view is last to be considered. That's white supremacy.
Yeah.
You look at our point of view first on our land. And then if you do that, you'll find out that quite often we are right and correct about many you have been wrong about. We all told you that Biden was going to be this way, and you wasted a year and a half effing around with it. We told you Bernie Sanders was going to be a train wreck, and you wasted literally years of that because you have white supremacist indoctrination. It's time to start seeing the indigenous resistance first. First on our land. You want to see white people first? Go back to Europe. And so these 8 wolves here, the power has to be taken back. We've seen recently up in Manitoba, indigenous folks asserting themselves against Parliament up there. And I was kind of waiting for that to happen, and I feel that our education is influencing the entire continent right now, which is exactly what I had hoped for. So it's really kind of kind of a beautiful thing there. And, we're just trying to get our friends, so-called friends, to see that. Like, why, as a capable leader, I'm targeted, chased with helicopters, you know. People apparently want to assassinate me now. And so all of our enemies know that I'm capable, that I'm a threat. But all of our allies are too allergic to the truth and too racist to embrace the only thing that's going to save them, because indigenous lifeways are the remedy to the planet. And because indigenous rule is the only thing that can unite the races of Turtle Island. Red power. It's time to start paying attention to the invisible. It was Kwame Ture who said, make the unconscious conscious.
Right.
Agnes Baker Pilgrim, we are the voice of the voiceless. And so we can be a keystone species again, too. That's what we could show the rest of the world. Human beings used to be, at one time, a keystone species, just like the wolf.
Right. And I think that most cultures all over the world have, embraced this capitalist mentality of consume, consume, consume until everything's gone. And I don't believe that that's our role on this planet.
No. From studying the tribes in Illahee, I know that there's a process of giving back. And one of the things that they did up here relentlessly was planted indigenous food crops everywhere.
And now that's real meaningful direct action.
Right.
Food is essential to survival, and restoring the indigenous plant life and the indigenous animal life, but restoring indigenous plant life is a hell of a good place to start.
Yeah. Yeah, and it can still be done. We've had some people in modern contemporary times, going out on horseback with 50-pound bags of seed, and I've planted a few small forests and stuff by now, and I'm starting to get a feel of what that would be like in your mind, to be able to say, like, I planted back acres and acres and acres. Red power.
Yeah, I mean, I think that even the people that don't necessarily see the importance of indigenous rules still agree that our food systems are entirely unsustainable. So I guess like what we have to do is show that indigenous rule can remedy that. And I think history shows that personally, but some people got to see it with their own eyes. And I think that's about probably the most meaningful direct action that I've seen out of almost any group, if not any group. I mean, we see like white leftists starting like communes and stuff with a little bit of land to farm, but that's not restoring the land That's feeding yourself, sure, which is still important, but that's not restoring the land. That's not planting food forests.
Maybe you can help me find this real quick. If Kwame Ture has addressed everything, so he said we're not. One does not. It's about not waiting for whites to. Oh man. So the way that you're saying that is like we have to win the influence of whites to work our program.
That's not what I intended, but I completely see how it came off that way.
And so I just wanted to address that. I think, and I'll find the right quote for it here, but it's that we're just not waiting for that influence of the colonists. We don't care what the colonist thinks, whether their approval. We don't seek their approval. If they're afraid of indigenous rule, we don't really care. We don't seek to alleviate their anxiousness about it, and we don't seek their approval. It's 100% a power issue, and a lot of it needs to be remedied directly from indigenous people. Indigenous people they're mandatory, obligated to participate in your own liberation struggles. Indigenous folks, that is a message to you from the Invisible Warrior. You are mandatory, obligated to participate in your own liberation struggles. Period. Red power. And when we do that, you'll find that we start getting the respect that's been missing for so long. Marcus Garvey say, a people without power and authority are a people without respect. That's why I say red power. I say to our allies, how long will you see us disrespected? And then I realize forever. You will forever see us disrespected because you benefit from our subjugation. So ultimately, it's that self-determination. The real punch of this movement has to come from indigenous peoples themselves. Red power.
Right. And I mean, maybe my wording wasn't the best, but I wasn't saying or trying to imply that you were doing it to seek their permission. But I think that you worded it a lot better than I did. But I think that essentially people are going to see that that's the right path, whether they like to or not, after it's happening. But yeah, I don't know. I definitely did not mean to imply that you were asking permission, and I totally get how my wording of it was problematic. So thank you for pointing that out.
I'm almost skeptical of what you said there too, because a lot of settlers and like these climate change groups, as soon as they get our ideas, they think, oh, well, we can do that better. We're white.
That's fair too. But I don't think that it should be white people doing what you're doing. I think it should be indigenous people doing what you're talking about.
Yeah, we go up to these. How I've started dealing with 350 on my land, which is a very problematic group, is I go up to their when they table now, and I grab all their flyers and I rip them up and I throw them back at them, and I say, "You do not have consent to organize on my land." So this is how we've gone about dealing with some of these people, because they don't understand the psychology and the power dynamics. They're the ones making us invisible. And so we have to topple all those European groups, any non-native group on our land. They have to be authentic. They should be functioning under indigenous rule.
Right. That's the thing too. How can Europeans even try to say we know what's best for this continent? As you've already pointed out, your oral history goes back like 100,000 years.
Yeah.
Europeans in general have
paternalism.
only been here for a few hundred years, and we've made everything worse for everyone and everything around us since we've been here.
Yeah,
So
that's
to think,
paternalism.
that Europeans could fix the problem is ridiculous to begin with, I think.
Yeah, the audacity.
Right.
We just covered how Floyd Red Crow Westerman said they poisoned all water in 100 years, and the audacity. And we find that with the wolf struggle too, when we've taken over some of these buildings and we confront staff. Some of them are so, and these are wildlife agency people, and they're so colluded with colonialism that their rebuttal is like, we brought the wolf back from extinction.
Oh my God. Wow.
Like they're entitled to some thank you like that, when if you rewind the timer, they were the ones that made them go extinct in 1953 to fucking begin with.
Right.
Colonial amnesia.
Well,
Like,
and I
we
mean, the
are
same can
not
be
the-
said about any other species that has been endangered since Europeans have been here, or the species that have gone extinct since we've been
Right.
here.
Yeah,
To
we
even
use
imply that we can fix it is just nothing but arrogance and white supremacy to begin with.
absolutely. Thank you for exposing that. And we further support that with a list of extinct species in Europe, because everywhere they go, they leave a trail of extinction. Extinction. Yeah. The great auk, the Caucasian bison, the windsit. A lot of these are animals that people don't even know they existed.
Well, and same goes with biodiversity for foods. I mean, now we primarily see sweet corn, for example, at the supermarket.
Right.
How many species of corn were there on Turtle Island before the factory farming of the last 100 years?
Hundreds. I would say maybe 200, and that's an indigenous plant. The same story we see with the potato, which actually originates from Peru. People think it's Irish. Well, they're quite mistaken. And there was at one point 180 varieties of potato in Peru. Red power.
That's insane. And I mean, I've read about like dozens at least of species of tomatoes as well. And I mean, what do we see at the supermarket?
Right.
Maybe a couple of species, but generally a species of either Roma or beefsteak.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's ridiculous as well. Not to mention that these tomatoes were grown to survive being shipped instead of grown for flavor and nutrition. So, like, again, what the hell are we doing? But yeah, I mean, we've seen our biodiversity be slashed since the revolution of factory farming. And it's no matter what angle you approach it from, it's completely unsustainable. It's not good for us. It's not good for the planet. It's time to go back to traditional indigenous methods of growing food. And obviously, white people can't fucking do that. I mean, I barely know how to garden by European standards, let alone. I mean, I know simple concepts such as the Three Sisters because we're taught that, like in school, or you can find that out at like the museum. But I don't know anything about food forests like you've talked about before. Like you had that picture of a valley, and you were saying you see desert, I see a food forest.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, I don't think most of us know even what species of plants that grow near us are edible, or let alone how to cultivate them.
That's right. I seen 13 ancient gardens in what colonists would think was a desert wasteland. As I've spent time with the land, you know, to have that relationship with,
Right.
But on these wolf thing, there's one more thing I need to touch on is the bolster the warrior societies element, because I pointed out the problem of what and talked a little bit about remedy, the 900 nations, but also that it's up to the warrior society to enforce these laws, not up to the police.
Right.
So you've got people going around saying abolish the police, and on the other hand, they ignore the indigenous people. It's basically how they say it in the same breath. And so we're saying, and I'm a member of one, I'm a member of a Kichita Heyoka, which literally means that I'm from a warrior society that's older than the United States. And I was put in that by the warrior society leader himself. The one before the one that's prominent now. There's one that's prominent now, and they're like, well, how do you even get accepted by the one before? I was like, hey, I was in the right place at the right time, following my destiny. And that warrior society leader said, hey, you have a good heart. I want you to join my warrior society. I didn't try to join his. He recruited me because I have a good heart. So there's a lot of people out there spread rumors, or they're very judgmental, and it's kind of like somebody who doesn't know how to swim trying to give advice to an Olympic swimmer. I'm in the pool every day, hitting backstrokes, hitting butterfly, tearing it up, and you can't even swim, and you have an opinion? Fuck your opinion. Red power.
Fuck yeah.
That's a pretty good analogy, honestly.
Right.
I like that.
It's up to these ancient warrior societies to catch these poachers. Nobody has faith that the wildlife officials will catch the poachers.
Oh, fuck
They
no.
won't.
There's no profit there for them. Why would they bother?
Right. And so you two know as well as I do that a systemic racism is involved in that too. I don't give a
Absolutely.
shit about animals that we believe that are sacred. See, because their own tells them the big bad wolf tells them,
Right.
the Bible is like protect your flock, kill the wolf. Malcolm X even uses that horrible wolf analogy. And so it's only anti-colonial politic that can overturn that contradiction. Red power.
Fuck yes.
Prior to like us starting, like talking the first few times, like, same thing for European stories. We're always, like the big bad wolf, for example, or
Mm-hmm.
Little Red Riding Hood if we're getting into German folklore. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that we always have this like negative conception of the wolf, and I think that's done intentionally for a very specific reason at this point. And I had never even seen it as problematic until we started talking to you, like more in depth. And well, it's problematic and it needs to be addressed ultimately.
Right.
Right. That being combined with people being raised with that drive to dominate is sickening, and how that ends up affecting the environment, the wildlife. Like, these are innocent wolves. They don't deserve to be fucked with like that. And the EPA
Right.
doesn't protect shit.
No, but that being said, even colonial wildlife agencies acknowledge that wolves positively impact the entire ecosystem.
But then do nothing with that knowledge.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And that's just one more
Where's their
example of
praxis?
why the land has to be in control of the rightful stewards.
Right.
Right, because this shit wouldn't be flying if this was actually in the hands of tribes to handle uh, the environmental agencies instead of it being in colonial hands.
Mm-hmm.
Because this shit just wouldn't be fucking allowed. As soon as that study is coming to the table going, here's the positive impacts we can see, something would be taken to help boost that in the environment, not just ignore it like, oh, but we're going to keep hunting them even though we can see they're beneficial. That would not be fucking flying at all.
Wolves over time can steer rivers.
Yes,
I, that's
that's powerful.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, everywhere that we have seen wolves getting reintroduced into areas that they had been hunted to extinction, we've seen these environments bounce back and come back into balance because
Yeah.
they have everything they need there back. It's fucking important to
Ask the
preserve the
birds.
wolves we do have.
Ask the birds how they feel about wolves. Nobody let them have a vote. A lot
Right?
of birds really like wolves because and I know this from living with wolves, they'll pick up the wolf hair and put it in their nest.
Yes. Yes. So I like, even when I brush my huskies, I put that hair outside for the birds to make use of. That soft, warm fluff for their babies.
Right.
That end, a lot of them that are scavengers will eat the carrion and stuff that's left from whatever the wolf hunts. It
Right.
it's beneficial. They're not just feeding themselves; they're feeding others that can't hunt other big animals.
Right. And like wolves, basically, I guess the way to sum it up is wolves bring the ecosystem into balance.
Yeah.
So when we're allowing wolves to be poisoned, or we're allowing wolves to be hunted or otherwise eradicated from the landscape, we're destroying the entire ecosystem. We're throwing everything out of balance.
Yeah.
Right.
And
That's suicide.
exactly. And colonial agencies shouldn't even have the cheese, Rev. Um, colonial agencies shouldn't even have the power that they do over the landscape, because from what I
Right.
see, they don't do anything really positive at all. And if they do manage to save a species, air quotes, I probably should put up there. If they do manage to save a species from extinction, it's only because they caused, well, not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
them, but colonists caused the extinction in the first place.
Right.
That's correct.
So
Right.
to circle back to that idea of like them wanting to be thanked for stopping, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
a problem that they're responsible for.
Savior
Right.
complex. Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's like, no, that's just accountability. once again.
Uh-huh.
Doesn't even qualify as justice because you can't undo the harm that was already done to the animals that had been there.
And to bring up another one of your quotes, Mko, there can be no justice on stolen land.
Stolen land. Yeah.
Yes.
Is there anything else you want to touch on? We're a little over an hour now, so it's probably a good time to start wrapping up. But if you got any like final thoughts or anything else that you want to touch on, feel free.
It's just to drive home that point about bolstering the warrior societies. And and this support businesses of color thing, don't do that. That's half-ass. That's like support capitalist. It has no meaning. First of all, it's not enough to be anti-racist. You must be anti-colonial.
And that includes anti-capitalism because it's dependent on both of
Yeah,
those for its existence.
right. So you can't just POC everybody when indigenous people are the rightful stewards. And then so it's to support indigenous resistance, support indigenous revolutionaries. Okay, because we're the ones that make society better for everyone. We're trying to make eco villages to provide for many, many, many people's needs. I see these GoFundMe's and stuff. Send some random POC some rent money so they can make it one more month. That is not sustainable. That is not sustainable. We have to be looking for collective issues to overcome these rent crisis, and that's land. Land equals power. Land back. We are the rightful stewards. We run this shit. So you bolster us. Reparations. Like, give us our shit back. Like, you're never gonna get it nice from me. You're never gonna get feel good. It's not about you. Y'all are saviors. Give us our shit back. Red power.
Fucking A.
Well, yeah, I mean, other than the return of the land and return of control of the land, there's nothing that can be said, nothing that can be done that can make it right. And that goes back to that same quote of yours: there can be no justice on stolen land.
Right. Okay. Well, hey, thanks again. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for the platform. Much respect. Red Power.
Anytime. Thank you.
Red power.
Red power.